So I've worked with Geoscience Australia for about 10 years now. Geoscience Australia are a government department in Australia, based in Canberra. I trained traditionally as a cartographer, and throughout my career I've actually had the chance to work on visualizing geospatial data and information for emergency response and preparedness. So moving away from the traditional topographic products and into actually making visualizations for decision makers. In 2014, I joined the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, who are leading the search for missing Malaysian aircraft MH370. My role there was the geospatial team leader, tasked with actually helping them visualize all their incoming information for the search, so all the data that was acquired, helping them define search areas, and kind of reviewing the quality of all the search data that impacted on where to search next. So to start with, I'll give a little background about the actual project for searching for MH370. So New Year's Day 2014 marked exactly 100 years since the birth of commercial aviation. In 2014, there were 37 million flights. That breaks down into over 100,000 flights a day and about 70 flights per minute. Over 8 million people flying per day expect to arrive at their destination safely. However, in March of that year, a commercial flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, carrying 239 souls, disappeared from radar. The search for the missing aircraft commenced March 8th and continued for 1,046 days. In January 2017, the search actually wrapped up. It was suspended based on an agreement with the three governments involved in the project, so Malaysia, Australia, and the People's Republic of China. There was extensive surface search. There was an extensive surface search conducted in the weeks after the aircraft disappeared. So initially they were searching where the aircraft ceased communications, stopped talking to air traffic control and just disappeared. A couple of days later, they moved to where it disappeared from primary radar. There was some initial satellite analysis that indicated the aircraft had either flown along one or two corridors. So it could have gone north to Kazakhstan, or it could have gone south into the Indian Ocean. After further satellite analysis, it was determined that the really logical, the only likely explanation was it went south, and a 52-day surface search led by Australian Search and Rescue was commenced. So this search was based off satellite information. So we reviewed satellites over the Indian Ocean to see if we could pick up any debris. The search was conducted by aircraft and vessels. So after we determined that there's a possible sighting, we would task the vessels coming from Perth to go down and check it out and see if they could actually pick up and confirm any debris. Satellite analysis was refined again, and we moved the search area from really far south, like Antarctica's just here, to a little bit further up around one of the main geological regions called Broken Ridge. So the search went for almost 2 months, the surface search. After that time, it was deemed like, after that time it was, there was a lot of pressure actually to move from surface search, because we hadn't found anything, to move more towards an underwater search. Satellite analysis hadn't really pinpointed a location to look at. So they were giving us an area of about 1 million square kilometres. But they didn't want to stop searching. There was a lot of government interest in it and a lot of political pressure, so ATSB were tasked with actually getting straight into it and getting into the surface, the underwater search. So there's very little information covering the middle of the Indian Ocean. Back in 2014, the only data available was satellite-derived bathymetry, with an average resolution of 200 metres per pixel. A Boeing 777 has a wingspan of 60 metres. So tasked with looking for something so small, the ATSB had to gather their own bathymetry first before they could even start the high-detailed underwater search. Okay. So bathymetry was gathered with a hull-mounted multi-beam system from 3 separate vessels. So the bathymetry took about 6 months to acquire along the 7th arc. And then we gathered more as necessary throughout the project as the search area moved a bit. So you see all these lines diverging to Perth. This is where the vessels left port. They kept their multi-beam sensor on as they moved to the search area to gather actual search-acquired data. So all these lines here, you see they're about 4 or 5 kilometres in width, and it's just like bonus data that we acquired during transit. So in total, about 710,000 kilometres were acquired of bathymetry data, which equates to the size of Texas or France, or if you're Australian, half the South Island of New Zealand. The better island. Insulted? Sweet. Okay, so once enough bathymetry was collected to actually commence sonar operations safely, we picked a system to use. So we decided to use a deep tow system. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the deep tow system, you chuck the deep tow off the back of the vessel, it's connected by a chain, and it floats off the seafloor about 100 to 150 metres, acquiring side-scan sonar data. Cool. There were 2 companies that assisted us with the sonar operations, Fugo Survey, using side-scan sonar, and Phoenix International, using a newly developed synthetic aperture sonar system. The sonar was gridded at about 1 metre resolution. So each line you see here is about 2 kilometres wide at 1 metre resolution. At the conclusion of the search, we had about 120,000 square kilometres covered by deep tow. This kind of equates to 157 terabytes of processed and raw data, so it was a lot of information to collect. Data acquisition ran for 28 months, and this is continuous, so through all weather, through summer, through winter, we had vessels coming in and out of port, not stopping and acquiring data the whole time for us. So Geoscience Australia have worked alongside ATSB from the start of the search. Initially, this involved processing the bathymetry data and the backscatter data. When the search commenced, ATSB had no existing geospatial capability. So the ATSB, the Transport Safety Bureau, are a small team, a government agency as well. They're made up of about 20 people, and they're transport safety investigators. So they look at incidents for marine, rail, and aviation. The team that they compiled to search for MH370 was made up with aviation investigators, project managers, and finance and accounting teams. So they really needed the geospatial support to help them visualize the data and make some decisions. Cool. So one of the first things I worked on when I started working with ATSB was defining a search area. So the initial search area defined by satellite analysis was over 1 million square kilometres. The budget for the underwater search when we first started, it was enough to cover 60,000 square kilometres. So a lot of factors went into determining a priority area to search within that. This includes using the last tangible information we had about the flight. So it took off from Kuala Lumpur, travelled, and then it stopped communicating with air traffic control. So all the systems shut down and we no longer knew where it was. It was then able to be tracked on primary and secondary radar past the Penang Peninsula and as it crossed the Strait of Malacca. And then it just ends. That's it. That's the last known point that we have for the aircraft. So if you combine that with satellite information, you can actually start developing potential flight paths and predicting and modelling. So there was limited satellite information available. There were maybe 5 to 10 points that were recorded in the last 7 hours of flight, and these included attempted contact calls to the aircraft and some automated reporting systems that the aircraft does automatically. A data satellite working group was created to assess the information, and this included experts from Thales and Inmarsat, Boeing, and Departments of Defence. So when the predicted modelling is combined with the parameters, known parameters of the aircraft, including fuel load, we had the ability to create a bounding box for search operations, so we could actually start the sonar survey. Okay, so this is the first search area that's 1 million square kilometres in size. It covers a lot of area, So the 7th arc you see here is the final satellite connection, so the final contact that the aircraft made with the satellite. So over the project, the search area has been refined a couple times. So this is due to changes in search strategy, getting better information, or actually changes in budget. So the search area has always been based off the best scientific knowledge, but it's constrained by budget. So as you see, we had an optimistic search area to start with, and then it just progressively moved further south and got smaller as funding and interest changed. So it changed about 6 or 7 times during the search. Go back. Okay, so data visualization is another thing that I helped the ATSB with. It was probably a key aspect of the geospatial support. The operational planners, so your aircraft investigative teams, they didn't have a geospatial background and they needed to know where the vessels were and what kind of data they had acquired and the quality of that data so they could make tasking decisions, like where to send the vessel next. So what we'd do is grab all the information we had, so the data coming off the vessels, the sonar, the bathymetry, and store it in ArcMap as our main visualization tool. This way we could easily review the data, quality check the data, and also export it easily for decision makers. So being a cartographer, I love making maps, and it was the easiest way to actually get a team of 10 people together to see all the data at once. The search area is about 10,000 kilometres long. So getting all that information onto one product meant that the maps were about 3 metres in length, and we were plotting them every week. So we got data daily and we were updating them. We were trying to export them through ArcMap, and we were refreshing them weekly. The problem is, as the search data grew, it got too complex to be efficient in a way. So it took a lot of time to export the map, and that wasn't fantastic for decision making. So when you have an operations team tasking vessels, they usually send out the plan a month in advance. So they're directed on where to go, what data to acquire. But weather can impact that. And if you have terrible weather during the winter, you need to retask your vessels. Now, the search area covered 4 UTM zones. So being almost 10,000 kilometres long, the weather changed depending on where you were. So if you're in the bottom of the search area, the weather was a lot rougher, and if you're in the top, up north, it was a lot calmer. So the decision makers, they really needed a way to quickly determine what data we had and where they should send a vessel if they had to change the tasking immediately. And waiting 3 hours for a map to export really wasn't cutting it. So what we did, we got more dynamic in a way. We actually took the footprint of the sonar data, converted it to polygon, so raster to polygon, and then we created KMZ files. So the vessels in the search are constantly tracked with AIS vessel tracking, and they're able to be monitored in Google Earth. Add the KMZ file, and then the project managers themselves can actually see where we've got data and where the vessels are at in real time. Other work that we did to visualize some of the information to help with searching was to look at depth analysis. So the search area is pretty full of complex geology. It's not just all soft, sandy sediment. There are a lot of steep geological features. And when you're tasking a vessel, it does impact on the quality of data you expect them to return. So we tried to make a couple of quick, simple products to explain to the decision makers that if you run a vessel over a ridge, then you're going to expect a gap in the data here because the sonar signal won't reach it. So this is one of the more complex geological features in the search area. It's known as the Giovinco fracture zone. So what it is a fracture zone that has a wall, a steep wall here, that is 1,000 metres high. So the slope on it is 60 to 80%, and it just drops off. And what we were trying to do is acquire lines of data across it to go with the direction of, with the flow of the ocean. So we couldn't, we got more stable data moving north to south than east to west. So trying to acquire data using deep toe systems that follow the seabed 100 metres above it, it was a little difficult and challenging in this area. The second and one of the other only named geological regions in the area is Broken Ridge. So Broken Ridge is at the very north of our search area, and the elevation change is pretty intense. So up here, it's probably 1,000 meters deep. But down the bottom here, where you see it goes deep purple, that's 6,000 meters deep. Okay, quality assurance was a very important part of the search. Like, a tremendous amount of effort went into ensuring the quality of the data, because at the end of the day, that gives us confidence in where we've searched. The data was reviewed manually by 4 different teams throughout the search, and then automatically reviewed using sophisticated software algorithms by 2 different companies in the US. So there is a lot that goes into checking this at every stage. So the data is acquired by vessels 24/7. It's reviewed on the vessel for anomalies. So looking at the sonar as it comes in and checking for anomalous signals in the sonar data and marking them for further review if they had potential to be the debris field. The data is then transferred from the vessel by satellite to secure cloud storage systems. It's reviewed again from contractors who are based on shore, and then that data is reviewed for a 3rd time by me at ATSB. After I've reviewed it, it goes on to an independent reviewer and into the automatic detection processes. The data is stored after it's been reviewed for quality and you've made any changes that you think need changing by Geoscience Australia for later release. But it is really the raw data that we're working with here. We're not going to the effort of making pretty mosaics for public use. It's just we acquire the data for a certain purpose, we review it, and then we store it away. So some examples of the quality assurance that we go through with the data for every line that comes in is a position check. So we check that the sonar data actually lines up with the bathymetry data that we acquired beforehand. And that is as simple as overlaying the sonar data that we've acquired with the bathymetry and looking for prominent features in both and ensuring that they're in the right position. And they usually are, they match up within 50 meters. The second thing we do is check the overlap between the lines that we acquire. We want to make sure that the position is correct along track and across track. So we get 2 adjacent lines, and again, we're looking for prominent features that we can see on both sonar records and making sure that there's less than 100 meters difference between the position. The third thing we do is calculate coverage for every line acquired. Coverage is calculated by generating a footprint around the polygon, the highest resolution polygon we have, and then calculating square kilometres. Coverage is calculated down to 0.3 decimal degrees, so we're pretty strict on keeping track of what we've got. So this figure feeds into daily reporting, but it's also used for decision making and contractor invoicing. Okay. So it's almost impossible to get 100% coverage with a single pass. The complex terrain or rough weather can cause gaps in the data. All data gaps large enough to obscure an aircraft were recorded in this project. And we kind of designed a metric to determine what would obscure our aircraft and what wouldn't. So we looked at historic aircraft incidences that had crashed into deep water, and we determined how big the spread of the debris field was. And we decided on a conservative metric of saying any gap in the data bigger than 100 meters by 100 meters has the potential to hide a debris field. So all gaps were digitized by hand, in a way. So we used a couple of different software systems, SonarWiz and ArcGIS, to record the types of data gaps, and then we stored them in a geodatabase for later infill. Over the project, we did get a few different classifications of data gaps. So what you see here is a terrain shadow holiday, where the geology blocks the signal, so in blue. We also have a terrain avoidance holiday, where the terrain is so complex that the towfish was raised very quickly from the seabed to avoid crashing into it. And at the altitude, you just lose sonar signal, and the data quality is not sufficient enough. We also indicated lower probability, so we tracked all this. Areas where the complex geology causes sharp signal return, and it lowers our ability to determine if there's a debris field in the area just because the signal return is so bright. It's not a bad thing, it's just a a portion of the data that we have that's harder to review. And then we did anomaly review. So this is done 4 or 5 times on the ship in the contractor office by myself as well. And we're looking for weird signal returns. And an example we have here is a shipwreck we found in the south of the search area. And this is what it looks like in the 1 meter resolution sonar data. And that's a single swath by itself. And because it was prominent enough that it could have been the aircraft, we actually did an AUV mission over it. So we stopped deep tow operations and deployed the AUV so we could get an idea of what we were actually looking at. The AUV did a camera mission as well, and we were able to pick up anchors and it was really quite a small, low-lying debris field. So it's excellent that we picked it up in the 1 meter side scan. So what you see here are nails. So anchors and just little bits of nails from the wooden vessel. So it's the 1800s, late 1800s transport vessel. And all the wood has deteriorated and it's just nails and anchors. Okay, operational planning. So the operational search provided many challenges. One of them was how to go back and infill data gaps. And we did this using an AUV and an ROV. Probably the coolest thing I've done is use GIS in an unconventional way, and that is to figure out the best way to transit from gap to gap. So the data gaps cover the entire area, and they're sparsely spread out. What we wanted to do was figure out the fastest way, because the money for the AUV is really in the transit. So the fastest way we came up with to filling in the data gaps was the delivery man's dilemma, if you've heard of it. You want to do a network analysis to see if you can move from gap to gap. The only problem is, location-wise, there's no joining networks, there's no road or transport networks. So what we did was pick the most interesting anomalies to investigate, and to build a road network between them, we ran construct sightlines. Sightline tool. So it's a really unique way of using the tool set to actually build a link from point to point. And then, once we had the network, we could then run the network analysis tool and figure out the fastest route to get from point A to point B. Cool. Yeah, done. Right, and if you want to look at it later, there's a story map. A story map that Geoscience put together for the data release. So Geoscience are the custodians of the data, and they have released the first phase of the data publicly. Second phase is released 2018. Cool, thank you.